Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Cunningham Township Board. It's Monday, October 28th, 2024. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Miss Wu.
Here.
Mr. Evans.
Here.
Miss Hersey. Miss Colasetti.
Here.
Miss Bishop. Miss Wilkin.
Here.
Mr. Quisenberry. Mayor Marlin.
Present.
Supervisor Chenoweth.
Present.
Assessor Olwana.
Here.
Next item on the agenda is approval of minutes from the August 12th, 2024 meeting. May I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Moved by Mary Alice. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Jaya. Any substantial corrections? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Miss Wu.
Yes.
Mr. Evans.
Yes.
Miss Colasetti.
Yes.
Miss Wilkin.
Yes.
That's it?
There's only 4 aldermen here.
James, okay. That motion passes. Any additions to the agenda? Presentations and public participation. If anyone wishes to address the Cunningham Town Board, please step up to the mic. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to committee to verify bills. Danielle?
Oops, greetings. So the bills were sent to you for the October 14th meeting. So we're basically going with those bills, which reflect September. So I just want to note the delay, that we canceled that meeting, and this is looking at September bills. Our next meeting will be November 11th, and that will be the October bills. So the bills for September reported on in October are the town fund expenditures of $47,393.55. The General Assistance Fund had expenditures of $207,307.84, and that brings the total expenditures to $254,701.39. And the bills are in your packet, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have from them.
Any questions for Danielle? Is there a motion to approve the Town Fund and General Assistance Fund bills?
James Quisenberry.
Moved by James.
I'll move the bills on file, or whatever the motion was wording.
Grace?
Yeah.
Moved by Grace.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mary Alice. Any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Miss Wu.
Yes.
Mr. Evans.
Yes.
Miss Colasetti.
Yes.
Miss Wilkin.
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
That motion passes. Reports of officers.
So first, let's see. Let me start with the financial review. You had Q1 report for the town fund and the general assistance fund. It's a little bit difficult to read because it has a DCO grant of $500,000 in it, so the percentage isn't quite so easy to read. But essentially, we're running under budget both with the town fund and the general assistance fund. There are some important things to note from the general assistance fund, as the demand for support remains very high. I do want to, I am pulling the numbers now, and I'll have more details at our November 11th meeting, but we have as many general assistance cases in the first quarter as we had all last year in terms of the number of people served. So that there's that. You'll see in the general assistance report that utility assistance in particular is significantly higher than expected. Food assistance is also higher. So those are areas where we're running over. And I just want to watch that going forward, not make any particular changes. Right now, general assistance and housing assistance are right at that 25% mark. Housing assistance mostly because we cut the funding significantly. You just get 1 month of rent at this point rather than, at one point it was up to 4 when we had more ARPA-related, not ARPA, COVID-related dollars, and then it was up to 2 months. So We are seeing more people not qualify for that program as a result. We also reduced the amount, the cap on income that they can make to qualify. So continuing to monitor those situations closely. I will say that our donations have been good. We're at 53% for the year, even though we're at a quarter. So I think that's great, and we always appreciate the people of Urbana and the community for supporting us. Happy to answer any questions about the financial reports if you have them. If not, I just wanted to lay out a few things from the supervisor's memo. Again, I also want to provide a more in-depth report because we're doing a pretty deep dive on who is actively unsheltered in Champaign-Urbana. Individuals and families. What we know is the rough estimate from our first meetings with all of our partners, and our office does convene a committee of all of our partners, emergency response, the hospitals, mental health organizations, a lot of different groups. We're seeing about 150 people actively unsheltered, unduplicated. That is significantly larger than last year this time. And we're seeing 16 actively unsheltered families with children who are literally homeless. And that is a deduplicated number. So we deduplicated that with our partners today. So I will also just say that I don't know if you have been up on North Lincoln Avenue anytime soon, but Hope Food Pantry had a line last Wednesday that went all the way down Lincoln Avenue and then turned and went down Bradley Avenue. And then there were people queuing up to try to get in line. I haven't ever seen anything like that. I didn't even see things like that during the pandemic. So I'm trying to pull call numbers for numbers of calls and emails to township. I believe, but I am not certain, that the number of calls we receive for services are greater than the police department at the city of Urbana, almost to a factor of 2. I will pull and make sure, and I will double check, because I don't believe that, because I do if you come to township, and you're certainly welcome to do a ride along with us and be a township. I would just have you sign a confidentiality form. But it is, what I'm hearing is it's off the chain, and I'm having to put more staff on the front desk. So I don't know what to say. I would say I'm concerned about going into the winter. I really felt like we had a better handle on things. I felt like this year, last time, I was able to report going into the winter that we were able to make sure that there was no one outside. We could not find a single person outside. That took an enormous effort from our staff and from our partners to get there. We're not going to get there this time. There's no way that we can house that number of people. Every single shelter is full. Every family shelter is full. Every single shelter is full. You can't add more expansion cots. It becomes a fire hazard. So that was the conversation we had today. It was pretty bleak. And we've really tried hard to get a handle on it because it's hard to dedupe a list. So we've actually been doing a by list name, making sure we had ROIs. We had a meeting that shrunk to just the people who are on the ROIs so that we didn't share any information. And it's a pretty bleak situation. So we will continue to move forward with our SMAS grant funded 20-bed shelter for the winter that will exclusively take folks from Strides and free up 20 beds there. And we have 5 more rapid rehousing units that we can fill. But everyone is reporting a high number of homeless individuals with vouchers, that a voucher is no longer a ticket to a home. And that is because of the cost of housing. The housing market is very tight. I had 6 reports of discrimination from 6 different organizations where landlords were asking that your income be 3 times rent, even if you have a voucher. That's illegal. It should be that your actual portion, that you can afford it with the portion you're supposed to pay. So I directed people to Hope Fair Housing. But I'm telling you as leaders of the city that it is not a good situation, and the township is not going to be the solution to this problem alone. So that's all I have to say for today, and I hope to have a lot more specifics and data for you at the November 11th meeting.
Mary Alice.
So Danielle, the numbers that you provided, are those people who, you say they're unhoused, are they some of them in shelters right now?
The 150 individuals and the 16 families with children are physically outside in abandoned buildings or in cars. That does not include the folks who are also considered literally homeless, who are in a domestic violence shelter, in our shelter at Strides, or anyone else who's in a shelter. It's actively unsheltered individuals.
Okay, so that means that the homeless population who doesn't have a permanent residence, how many beds are at Strides right now?
There's 65 beds at Strides that are beds. There's 64. There's 64 beds. There's 10 outreach cots that are available at people knock on the door in the middle of the night and it's emergency. They don't have other places to go. Those are full but 2 right now. And then when the temperature dips below a certain degree, then the city of Champaign has authorized them to add some additional beds. And I believe that that number is 10, but I'll have to check. So basically that's where we're at with that piece. What we're doing, in case it would be helpful, and I can share this without sharing identifying information, is United Way is basically helping to track real-time bed capacity and how many beds are available. They're doing that by coming to our meetings and filling in the numbers, but today we kind of looked at the template that they had created that we had asked them to do and talked that through and made sure that it was structured in a way. So the goal is that if somebody calls 211, that actually instead of being sent someplace where there is no bed, we can at least help direct people to a place where there is bed. Same thing with our emergency response personnel. They have somebody who's actively unsheltered. What do you do?
So I know that when we had asked about some of the people who were unsheltered when it was quite cold, you had mentioned that there were some couples who didn't want to be separated. Do you know, out of the 150 who are currently unhoused, what proportion, roughly speaking, are in that scenario?
Yeah, let me see if, let's see. Right now, so we have 80, this is Cunningham Township only. So I can only speak to our portion, but it gives you a sense. We have 87 individuals counted who actually have given us demographic information or circumstance. And we have 23 where we have pretty much no information except their name and that we know they're homeless. So those are 2 combined numbers. So of the 87 where we actually have information, we only have 1 couple with no children who is listed. I do want to mention that of that crew, where 16 are disabled, 21 are not disabled, and 13 it's unknown. There are no veterans. Only 1 is fleeing domestic violence. I found it quite concerning that 21 of them are over the age of 50, whereas only 20 are under the age of 50. So half essentially are what I would say seniors or approaching seniors. I guess I'm calling myself a senior at this point with that statement. So we are trying to get information about income, household type, race and ethnicity, age, veteran status, disability status, fleeing domestic violence, and what their barriers to congregate shelter. Those are the data points that we're collecting. And because we have a ESG-funded street outreach grant, it does help us to we're trying to get much better, when we've had this kind of bulk street outreach picture, and we're really trying to segment that population and better understand that it's many different populations. One of the areas we are looking at, but is not yet tracked, is language. We have ethnicity, but knowing whether or not they are an immigrant or not. That is one piece.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Chris?
Thank you for the report, Danielle. What would happen if Stride's shelter closed?
We would be back. We'd be thrown back 15 years in time. We can't have Strides closed. That can't happen. It should not happen. And I will say Strides needs to be the low barrier shelter. That's what it's designed for. So Strides submitted documentation about who is at Strides based on recent, and I'd be happy to share the picture that Strides staff shared. But we know that at least 20 people staying at Strides receive SSI, SSDI. That means 1, they're disabled, 2, they're not going to get more money than they have now. So whatever housing options got to work with their current income. In my opinion, they should not be at Strides because they have income and they should be in housing. So we designed our winter shelter program as a 6-month program specifically for people initially with income. So whether it's earned income or SSI, SSDI, and asking them to form roommate pairs. This is all voluntary. So if they'd like to be in our program, they could stay in a hotel in roommate pairs that are seeking housing together. And that housing might be, by room rentals. We're working with some landlords that have quads, some landlords that have 2, or it might be a 1 or 2 bedroom place that you're renting together. So they will be in the hotel together, and then they will move in. They will seek housing together and move in together, even if they're friends or, have been staying at Strides, they're colleagues, they know each other. They do not have to be couples. So we're looking at what we have, but I would say if healthcare was run the way homeless services was run, God help us. So.
Grace?
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to if you have any sense or knowledge of some of these causes. You'd mentioned the vouchers and housing discrimination being a big piece, and I can imagine inflation and other factors, but I didn't know if there was any other kind of bigger thing in the community going on that you can see or sense.
Price of housing and price of goods and services are absolutely the top issues. Most of the people, we're working with a lot of people who work, but their job is DoorDash or it's Uber Eats. It comes and goes. Their car breaks down and they no longer have work. We've worked with people who are delivering food on like a motorbike or a scooter, and we've been able to, with angel donor funds, fix the scooter or motorbike when it breaks down, or potentially get them another used one. We did that in one case. So I would say just there's some level of precarity with employment that we've always had in a college town, but you add, there's a woman that I know who is in her 60s who's been in the same rental unit for 35 years, and her rent doubled this year. So, and she's a senior, and she's on a fixed income. That's an extreme. I haven't seen doubling, but I've seen by hundreds of dollars, like $400, $300, $400, $500, those kind of increases. The University of Illinois over-enrolled students, then they didn't have enough housing for them, and they gave them housing vouchers. And when that happened, we literally saw people who are about to move in and were being offered housing, have the housing taken away from them, and not the offer taken away, because they could get better money, and people wanted to rent to students. So I would say it's primarily those pieces. We continue, when a housing market is tight, landlords can be more choosy. I always tell landlords, okay, if you're going to be choosy, then set your credit limit, but then you have to apply it evenly with everyone, right? So if you have a student who doesn't have credit, you can't treat them differently than a non-student who also has a low credit because they haven't had like, it's the same, right? You have to treat people fairly. So I think that's the issue we're going to have to address. Now, we do have an abundance of housing units in the community. The old Gramercy units are now, this is Champaign, but it's important because it's over 100 units that are basically almost close to condemned. That's 100 units that could be used for housing in our community. Any of the housing units that we see that are struggling on Philo Road, those are housing units that could be used for folks. So, I mean, I think it's really, really important that we figure out how do we address the housing stock piece. Building new is very expensive, but the Housing Authority is a good person to do that and the city as well, because we can bring in public dollars that are not available to private entities. But we're going to need to figure out the housing stock issue. I mean, it's hit a lot of other parts of the country first. It hasn't. We've had a pretty affordable housing market here in the community. We've enjoyed that for a long time, and we're moving past that time. So the problems of this administration are going to be similar to the problems of some of the cities that we've seen where, I mean, over half of the entire population in the country is is rent burdened. So, but we have more folks rent burdened here. So I think it's not only our problem, it's a kind of global problem, but I do think that we're going to have a local solution to it because we're the ones experiencing it.
James, did you have any? Oh, Sharice, go ahead, and then James, if you have any.
Is there any organization or anyone doing anything regarding the ban on rent control in the state of Illinois?
Yes. I mean, I believe that groups that we are members of, like Housing Action Illinois, which is a lobbying arm for kind of housing first and homeless services, is part of that.
Is there any way something like that could be put on a referendum on the ballot?
I mean, it's certainly very easy to have an advisory referendum, as we know, and then we could look at that. But I think it's worth talking to, our state senator and our state representative about the needs that we are seeing.
So no one's been talking to our state senators and our state representatives regarding this particular issue?
I can't speak to that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I haven't had a sit down. I know that the mayors and our state representatives has sat down some years ago and talked through, and I felt like it was a very collaborative approach to looking at, okay, what are we dealing with? And I honestly feel like the Housing Authority has been one of the most responsive to some of the kind of asks that came out of those conversations. The Housing Authority has been pretty proactive in acquiring properties and turning them into project-based properties and expanding affordable housing. I feel like they've been the leader in the community since some of those conversations. So then I feel like now we have to, the Housing Authority is one tool and they can only do so much, but I feel like that model of sitting down and thinking about, okay, doing a landscape of what is the issue and what are some of the tactics we could use, I think it's probably prudent for us to consider that again. And then I think we're stronger together. So if the cities, the townships, RPC and others approach our state leaders together, it's a more unified picture. But I mean, for example, in Champaign, and I've let the Champaign leadership know, it's really, I mean, honestly, if they had we have a tenant relocation ordinance that they don't have, and they weren't even, some of them were not even aware we had, so I shared that language with them, and I let them know the city can have a rental registration program, it can have a tenant relocation ordinance, and you can cite a landlord and put a lien on the property to reclaim those costs, and then start forcing them to make upgrades to those properties, or potentially they get out of the business in our community and someone else takes over. So I think there are some strong mechanisms, and I think it's worth both cities looking at where the housing market has been really tight, how they've addressed that issue. of lack of affordable housing and rent.
Within the community, I know you serve them a lot. Are any of them former home owners?
You mean who are homeless?
Yeah. Are any of them like former homeowners that may have lost their homes based on, unemployment, unable to make the mortgage, reverse mortgages, something like that just didn't work out?
What I see, so I don't see people who, certainly there was a lot of fear during the pandemic, and we had a lot of folks, including homeowners, contacting us. I would say what happens typically is someone has a family home and they inherit that home from their family members, and they're not able to afford everything, insurance, taxes, maintenance on the home, and it becomes difficult. Usually they don't even have a mortgage on the home. So I've seen some instances, but I wouldn't say it's very common. And there are a few tools around mortgage assistance in the community. I mean, I certainly think it's important to help people with home repairs and mortgages who are low income and own their houses, because we want to help them keep their homes. But I wouldn't say it's very common.
Okay, I was just wondering, like, background, as far as residency background, because sometimes that can make a difference too, if you on how we what services we have regarding that.
Yep.
But I was just interested if there was any movement at all on lifting the ban on rent control in the state.
I know, I would refer you to Housing Action Illinois, because I know there is some movement there, and they probably have information online.
Okay, thank you.
James, did you have any questions?
I do not.
Okay. Anyone else? Ivana, did you have any report? No? All right, we'll move on to unfinished business. None. We have one item of new business, which is resolution number T 2024-10-006R, which is a resolution setting compensation of Cunningham Township officials for the 4-year term beginning May 19th, 2024, and that's for the township supervisor, township clerk, and township board, and beginning January 1st, 2025 for the township assessor. A couple of notes. You all did receive you were emailed an updated resolution, which corrected the dates in the charts. And then a reminder that this compensation setting is on a slightly different schedule than the council. So the town board needs to set these salaries for the upcoming 4-year term no later than November 20th, 2024. Over to the township officials.
Yeah, so I'm going to have our special projects coordinator, Maya Bauer, present on the salary comparables that she pulled. I did, just from a process perspective, I wanted to share with you where we are in the process and make sure you have the proper documents in front of you. So today's conversation is meant to be a discussion and then with a vote on November 11th. So I'd encourage you to have a discussion about this, partly because my flight was delayed coming back, and so these documents weren't necessarily in the packet. We finalized things on Friday or over the weekend. And so I want to make sure that there's an opportunity for them to be in the packet for the final vote. That said, the second is that you received a salary resolution, updated salary resolution from Maya before the meeting. Because there were some errors in the date, and then Ivana just brought to my attention that the title of the resolution also has the wrong date. So let me just be clear that this compensation is for township officials for the 4-year term beginning May 19th, 2025. for the supervisor, clerk, and board, and beginning January 1st, 2026 for the Cunningham Township assessor. And if that's confusing, you could talk to the state because they're the ones who set the terms. So just, you should look at the most recent document that was sent in terms of the resolution language, which the numbers in terms of dollars are all the same. The only updates are to the dates. And then you should be looking at a PDF that was sent that is on the supervisor's compensation. And I think Ivana has a written document about the assessor's compensation. Is that correct? That you passed out? Okay, great. So I think what I'd like to do is go ahead and, as long as we understand the process and what documents we're looking at, hand it over to Maya Bauer to present from the supervisor's office.
Go ahead, Maya.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, wonderful, thank you. My name is Maya Bauer. I'm Special Project Coordinator at CTSO. I've done some research on comparable salaries and want to direct you to the document that Danielle mentioned. As she mentioned, the first paragraph is just about the dates and the particulars of Illinois state law. The second paragraph, to support the town board in this process, we've created the following chart to show the growth of the supervisor's office with 5-fold increase to staff size and over 6-fold increase to general assistance budget over the past 7.5 years. So this chart right here shows you that in 2017, the staff size was 4, the budget was 1.3 million, and the supervisor's salary was 61,000. In 2025, the staff size will be 20, with a budget of 4.7 million and a proposed salary of 95,000. I think I want to draw your attention to the factor increase at the bottom of that chart. The staff size has increased by a factor of 5, general assistance over 6, and we're proposing a supervisor salary increase of 1.55. CTSO has grown in complexity from 1 to 7 programs and 0 to now 6 grants, operating 29 formal community partnerships. And really, this is to ensure that CTSO can attract the kind of leadership that can effectively sustain the current programming. As you just heard Danielle talk about, it is quite a breadth and scope, and the need is higher than ever. We think it's prudent to ensure that the supervisor salary is at minimum competitive with executive director roles of similarly sized nonprofits, as well as department heads of local government agencies. For that, I've made this chart below. It gives you quite a few salaries of comparable roles in the area. The column to the left is when the salary period. All of this, if you have any questions about the research or where the information is pulled from, I'm happy to answer that or to get back to you with answers later. You can see the second line item in this chart is the current supervisor's salary. And on the following page, the third row is the proposed supervisor salary at $95,000. This falls just below the grants division manager at the city of Urbana, a role that is not a department head. And then we have, you can see down the list, executive directors of, like, I'll pull out Courage Connections, chief executive officer at 109,000, City of Champaign community relations manager at 111,000. So we want to make sure that that the salary that we are offering to the supervisor, current and future, keeps us competitive. We can attract the kind of leadership that can maintain this high level of programming. But you can also see from this chart that even the salary that we're proposing is on the low end of the spectrum in a bid to keep in mind the budget and to be fiscally responsible. Are there questions?
Any questions for Maya? Mary Ellis.
Yeah, I have a
Oh, sorry, go ahead, James.
I was going to ask, I noticed on the list of comparables that the city of Champaign Township salary for the supervisor was not included. Do you have that information?
City of
I've looked
Champaign Township.
online. I
believe it's the fourth line.
James, it is listed in the memo.
Okay. Maybe
It's
it's not the one I,
73,000.
maybe I'm looking.
73,365.
I may have not been on the version I was looking at. Okay, thank you.
Mary Alice.
Yeah, so I'll say this kind of took me by surprise. And it took me by surprise because we had a conversation about a month and a half ago about elected officials and employees and whether or not elected officials should be getting paid at least as much. I was actually making that argument, and then I was told at township meeting, no, elected officials should be making less. So as I look at this is a pretty significant amount, and I realize this is just a discussion. So one of the things that I've been thinking about, and we kind of looked at this with the clerk's position as well, is what is required of the township supervisor. So as best as I can tell, and Danielle, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the only requirement by state statute is that the general assistance is complete. Is that correct?
So the requirement, which is in the state statute, is that general assistance is provided. They also are the FOIA officer. They are the administrator for the township as a whole. They oversee the fiscal management of the organization. They make sure all the proper filing happens. At a very minimum, that's what the supervisor does. I think in this situation, what's tricky is that what the township has grown to because of the need in the community is a totally different animal. I think you saw from the township report, looking at the 30 townships throughout the county, that there's a wide range of what townships do. The township as it exists now, and you have to decide if you want that going forward, is that it basically operates as a nonprofit or similar to, in terms of its size and its scope and its budget, like a high-level department within the city. So with 20 employees and verging on $5 million, it's much more like a nonprofit. So I think the argument that I will not always be in this position. Certainly, I think you should set the position not based on me, but based on the position that we want for the township. My earning power is very different than what is on the paper here. So I think it's not appropriate necessarily, but I don't think that looking at the state statute in any way reflects what the township supervisor's office is and what the current infrastructure is. So I think I would encourage the town board to think about what, for a new supervisor to come in, for someone willing to take on the breadth and scope of the organization and have the skill set to manage at this level, rather than they don't, and then they lose the grants and they shrink the organization. You're going to have some level of competitive salary to retain that. And so if a supervisor comes in, like, let's say Michelle Mayol, who shrunk the GA from 175 folks to 26, you reduced the township levy during her term. Would be absolutely appropriate for you to reduce the salary of the supervisor in the future if the level of work is not at the same level. So I think I would look at size of organization, amount of money coming in, and I just wanted to add that a portion of my salary is paid out of grants. So it's not in addition to what I'm paid, it's actually paid out of grants. So the levy does not actually fully pay for the current supervisor's salary. And I think that would be something I would want you to consider, is how many grants are coming in and to what extent are the grants supporting a working supervisor. I will say different people have different approaches to elected office, but both under Carol Elliott and under myself, we have always operated as either a full-time job or sometimes over a full-time job. So there's a long history of this position being a working in-office position that is a hands-on management role. And in many ways, I think that's why our township, under both Carol and myself, has been functioning at the rate that it's functioned. So I'm not exactly sure. I certainly didn't make the statement that you're referring to. I think that you have to look at the position and the supervisor's office, its scope and size and its grants. And I think the assessor and the supervisor also are different divisions with different numbers of staff and different size budgets as well.
So you had referenced the salary. I was not aware that there would be a mechanism in place during a person's term to reduce the salary. I thought that we were setting it for the next 4 years.
Correct. Yeah, what I'm saying is if someone comes into the supervisor's position and they shrink, certainly I wouldn't expect that anyone would be able to shrink the township overnight. But if over the term of 4 years, they shrink it back. So for example, Carol Elliott had general assistants at 175. Michelle Mayol shrunk that over 4 years to 26 clients. That would be a time if she was running again or not, it doesn't matter. But if you're looking at the size of the township and what its service is, you as the town board could set that compensation based on the size of service that's happening. What has happened instead is, last year we served 5,000 people, and most likely that we'll see an increase in that. I think my big picture concern is that I am already concerned about having built out the township at a level that a future supervisor would be able to maintain. I think that if you can provide a competitive salary for that position, then I think you'll be able to bring someone in who's a full-time working person who has the competency to maintain. If you don't, I have concerns about being able to attract talent in the future to this position.
So I think
and your current talent. So, I will make my decision about this position. I'll make my own personal decision about the position on my own. But I think you have to make a decision about, is there a need for this? Is the township operating properly? What size is it? And how do you want to retain or bring in new talent for that position? Just like you would with a department head or another position.
So the two things that I'm struggling with are, number one, a township supervisor has a lot of latitude in terms of the types of programs that they develop and administer. And certainly you've grown township to be very robust and to address a lot of the different community needs. But for whatever reason, if you're not in that position, we have no guarantee that somebody would step in and maintain that and continue that process because of that latitude. The second piece that I'm struggling with is the fact that basically the public only has once every 4 years to state whether or not they want a person to be a supervisor of township or not. And so in that case, the employee can get fired if they don't do their job, right? Somebody who's elected doesn't get fired, or if they do get fired, it's only after 4 years. So my concern is that if we look at the office and what it's responsible for, I think we have to take into consideration those items. And I did this when we were talking about salaries before, which is I don't think the suburbs or Chicago area is a good reference because the cost of living is much higher up there. And just looking at what the Champaign township supervisor makes, I think more appropriate amount would be about $75,000-$80,000 for this position. So I'm going to put that out there. Those are my big thoughts at the time in terms of how we should think about this position and the salary.
Jan.
Are we at discussion or just questions? general discussion?
Yeah, there's no action.
Okay,
item. Yeah.
yes, just wanted to clarify. So I think it's really important to think about what we want this position to be. And I kind of alluded to this when we were talking about the city appointments as well, is that if we want to attract candidates that are qualified to do this work, they have to be competitive. I think, again, we've been provided with information that shows, look at Bloomington Township, 94,000 as it is, right, October 2024. There's comparables in terms of folks in leadership roles. And I say that partially just because it's not just GA. It's not just the levy. If we're going to continue to grow, if we're going to continue to bring in additional revenue through grants, you have to have someone with the expertise to do that. And we can't expect someone who has that skill set to take a $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 cut to do this work. Not everyone's going to be able to make that kind of decision for themselves and their family, and not everybody's going to make that decision just because professionally it's not the right choice. We're very fortunate to have a very skilled supervisor who's not making something that's comparable to her worth at this time, but in order for us to be able to maintain that level of competency, I think that it's important that we do more forward with I think that this is a more appropriate, and it's hard, right? Like, we have a fiduciary responsibility. We need to make sure that we're thinking about how we're using funds. But to me, this is an investment, right? In order to be able to continue to bring in more money. And if you look at how much money we were bringing in prior to Danielle versus now, I think you'll see that investing in someone with the expertise to do the job is well worthwhile.
Sharice.
I guess what I want to say is that, like the city clerk, the supervisor's not appointed, she's elected. We don't get to appoint her. And so as much as I agree that we want to be able to attract the most talented and knowledgeable person regarding this, at the same time, I'm also keeping in mind how we don't really make the choice of who's going to sit in that chair. It's the people of Urbana that make that choice. And whether they make an informed decision when they mark the box or not is not something that we have any control over. And so I appreciate how Danielle has grown this position to be what it is right now. But I'm also aware that previous supervisors didn't. And they did the bare minimum. And I don't want to give somebody, I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a bare minimum baby and that's all you're going to do, then that's how you're going to be when you run for office too. And people, I'm not trying to make people choose based on personality or based on what the successes that Danielle has done, because I can't be sure that should she choose not to run and she goes back into the private sector, that the person that comes behind her is going to be as diligent and as just her will to try to solve these problems. We are definitely lucky to have her as supervisor now because of everything that she works to do. But I agree that she needs a raise, but I don't know that her raise should be comparable to what is in the private sector, because she's an elected official, just like, all of us. So it is one of those things where this is a difficult kind of bridge to cross, because you never, elected officials are like a box of chocolates, as Forrest Gump would say. You never know what you're going to get. So I think that we have to kind of keep that in mind too when we're talking about this.
Grace.
Thank you. I had a question and then some discussion. I was wondering what the increases were based on. It looks like the supervisor starting salary based on that scale. I was wondering what the annual increases are based on.
What's proposed is a 3% annual.
Except the last year, right?
Yeah, the last year, essentially, I think it runs like, it starts and then it's a year and a half without going up. And that would be basically the town board at that time could determine, whether they want to increase it or not. So that last period, I think, goes 15 or 16 months at the same rate.
Okay, thank you. And then some of my discussion, I agree that it's a hard decision without all the information since we have no guarantee who will serve in the term next and how they might manage this role. I definitely agree with paying people competitively, especially for this really important work in the community. I guess I didn't realize that so many people make so much money after seeing this chart. So I think I need some time to kind of let it soak in what is competitive pay in some of these leadership positions. So I really appreciate the information and that we have a little more time. I'm glad that this was brought up beforehand so that we can kind of get some more information, discuss a bit, and then have it back for a vote. As far as Mary Alice's proposals, I think that some modifications I'd be open to. I think that the 75 to 80 seems too low for me compared to some of these other things. But over 100,000 also seems like a lot. So I don't know, for some reason, like 95 to 100,000, I feel just my gut more comfortable with. But again, I'll review some more information and glad that we have some more time to think about it.
And just for transparency, the current township supervisor and assessor salaries are $72,176. So the first year increase represents about a 32% increase over the current salary. Jaya.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify, Sharice, to your point, I'm not encouraging us to look at for-profit industry comparatives. I'm saying I think that looking at the nonprofit equivalents so that folks who might have that kind of grant expertise are more likely to apply. I think that is relevant, but yes, there's a huge range, right? If you're looking at for-profit as well, we're not even touching on that. So I wanted to provide that clarification. I do appreciate also having more time on this, and I hear what folks are saying in terms of concerns about, we don't know, right? This is a gamble, right? And I think it is important that we think about that risk, but I also want to encourage us to think about what's going to encourage people who are qualified to want to do this work. And that if you look at comparable positions, nonprofit leadership roles, the compensation increases in those positions over the last few years since COVID, you do see those big jumps. That's the reality of the marketplace now, is that people for years have been told, you just take what you can get because you care. And I think there's a big pushback on that of people saying, we do hard work, we deserve to be paid for that hard work. So I think it might be helpful for folks to have a little bit more information about like what those kind of steps have looked like, for other townships and for other nonprofits, because I hear what folks are saying is this is a big jump, but the economy is totally different now than it was 4 years ago. So I think it's important for us to look at what has been the general change in general. And like I said, I'm not even saying that I'm wedded to these particular numbers, but just to encourage people to think about what is going to make someone who has the potential to do comparable work elsewhere want to do this work for our township so that we can continue to build on what we have now.
Diane?
Go ahead, James.
Yeah, I have a couple of things I want to say. First of all, I appreciate the work that's been done on putting together the proposal. I think it's always important to look at what's going on around us. I totally agree with what Jaya is saying, that we've made a lot of decisions on compensation in the last couple of years, and I'm not separating our city decisions versus our town decisions. They're all related. The economy is all related. But there have been pressures that have forced salaries to go up. I do want to note, I think Diane pointed out that the supervisor increase for this would be almost 32%. It's 31.6%. But the assessor's proposal is a little bit more modest at 20.5% increase at 87. I think we have to be consistent if we're going to talk about market pressures here and encouraging people to run for these positions. We have to do it in all of the circumstances that we have in front of us. I would note that we have approved a budget that adds a deputy supervisor to address some of the workload that has been created by the growth of township. We also are essentially hiring a former assessor at halftime to keep things going. So we should have those things on our mind too as we're thinking about this, because those are costs that we're incurring to accomplish these goals. I will point out that if we're looking at how the township has grown with the $4.7 million budget and 25 people in it, the city is a $78 million budget with 280 people in it. So are we going to, in a little bit, approve a mayor's salary that reflects the size of what's going on there and what we need to pay to encourage someone who runs, the city? Not only, it's a construction firm, it's a law enforcement firm, it's a fire department, it's a community development department, it's a number of things. So I feel like we need to be consistent. I believe we are not paying our chief executives, elected or not, enough. So I'm supportive of increases, but they have to be relative and they have to be responsible. I don't know if I'm not sure if this was coming to a vote tonight that I can support the proposal that's in front of us. I will support an increase, but I don't know that I would support one of this magnitude. And a lot will depend on what we end up approving for the clerk and the mayor's salary, because I can't see that it would make sense to be paying the supervisor of Cunningham Township, which has a focused operational function, more than we would be paying the mayor of the city, which is a much more diverse, higher budget responsibility. So those are my thoughts. I will support an increase. I don't know if I can support one of this size.
Jaya.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple more points. Danielle, one thing I think I will say that I'd like to see as we're looking at these numbers is thinking about how to raise compensation for the other staff at Township too, right? So as we're thinking about long-term costs, that as you grow that team with all the work that they do, thinking about making sure that those positions are also competitive for our area so that we can retain that talent and hopefully encourage folks to move up and run for office at those other positions as well. I hear James's point about how the city versus the township numbers might impact each other, but we didn't get a proposal for something like this. I think the positions that I've seen where there's been evidence to say this is what would actually be appropriate, this is where I'm pulling these numbers from, that's compelling. And I think we've had some offices make that case, and I think we've had some that haven't. And so I think I want to be a little bit cautious about comparing apples to oranges. I think I agree with James. I do think that the leadership roles, certainly even just in terms of elected officials, are not keeping up with current marketplace, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I think that's something that in the long term could well hurt our ability to keep folks in leadership roles. So I think that's just something to say of, like, if a more competitive compensation for for the mayor, for example, was put in front of me, I'd be having the same conversation. If I think it is important that we pay people what they're worth to the best of our ability, as long as it is still fiscally responsible.
Mary Alice.
This is a question, and I apologize, I didn't write down the name of the person. Maya? Is it Maya? So as I look at this, salary comparables, I see a couple of the townships. I'm wondering how you selected the townships to use as your comparables.
Yeah, absolutely. I pulled Waukegan because it is one of the only townships that operates a shelter, and so I thought that was worth including. Bloomington is a similar college town size as Champaign-Urbana is Urbana, and obviously Champaign is our neighbor, although quite a bit bigger, and has a different kind of scope of what they're doing with their township.
And I thought I saw Normal on here. Am I incorrect? I swear I saw Normal on here. Maybe it's on a different.
I believe Bloomington.
So Bloomington is about the size of Champaign, I believe, and Normal's about the size of Urbana. I guess what I would say is I'd like to see some cities that are similar size to Urbana on this comparable list. I don't know what the size of Danville is. I know Effingham is bigger. I don't know about Charleston and Mattoon. So
I think Danville's about 27,000 at this point.
Okay, so it's smaller. I think it would be helpful if we took other Central Illinois comparables. I don't know how easy or difficult that is to find that information, but I think that would be helpful.
Is there any other information council would like, or town board would like to consider this? Grace.
I was just wondering if that was all, we're taking these all together, or if there was any more information about the assessor or other positions.
I was just waiting until you all were done discussing the supervisors to move forward with the assessor stuff.
Okay. And just a point of process, if we're finished with the supervisors, I'd like to be excused as we go to the assessors, because I have not eaten dinner yet, so I just want to double check if there's any other questions that folks have. Otherwise, I'll excuse myself from the meeting, since we're not looking to take a vote this evening. I will work with Maya to prepare answers to some of the questions. And in particular, I think in the issue of public officials, I think it would be important to make sure to draw your attention to the county officials who are working public officials in specific areas. So I know the circuit clerk is listed here at $97,000, but I could also bring the county executive in and the county clerk. I think the county clerk is at $125,000, but we could pull some of those in. And then I think it's useful to look at the township size of the programs. So I think that's one of the reasons we looked at Bloomington. It's much more comparable. They're a robust programmatic township. But I don't know I don't know the numbers for Normal, so we can certainly look at that piece. And I do want to note that the City of Champaign Township supervisors level is pre-stride, so they did not own a shelter at the time that they set that compensation. I think that, and I guess I would say the last thing is, I would really hope, I think that you may know that old adage that once you build something, it's actually really hard to get rid of because people rely on it. And I just want you to imagine, if there was someone, this is like my worst fear, if somebody came in as supervisor, just like they could with a nonprofit, and I can name some nonprofits where this has happened, where a nonprofit came in and totally scaled back operations or made that organization less functional, what the people of Urbana would do, especially given that they've come to rely on a specific set of programs and needs, and the cascading crisis that it would experience. So I feel like there's a certain level of accountability in our community around that piece that gives me a certain peace. And I would just say, I really hope that it's not a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, we're worried that, official will not perform, and therefore we're going to undercut their salary so that we're not actually able to bring in an official who performs. So I just want to name that my piece, I took a 5-figure pay cut to come into this position. I absolutely understand that. I understood that move. I didn't actually anticipate being in the supervisor's position this long. I consider, a lot of what I do, this is part of my charitable service to my community. My concern is sustainability for the township long-term. That is really my ultimate concern. There's not a personal concern in this. And so I think I just want to make sure that we're able to bring someone in who can manage the township at this level. And looking at leadership in the community, we are definitely in a position where we're not funding at the level that we should. And I would say that for the mayor's position as well. I think you have to look at how you can attract the talent into a space, and having to rely on someone who's retired, or somebody who happened to have a small child and they're trying to stay close to their child's school, which was my situation, having to thread the needle in these very specific ways to be able to bring somebody into a leadership position really does put a large project in a precarious situation. So with that, I am happy to get you additional information to make sure it's in the packet next time, and I appreciate your time and attention and thoughts about this.
Thank you. Ivana.
Okay, so not entirely sure where to begin, given that some of the things that were covered discussing the supervisor's potential salary will likely be covered with mine as well. But just to give a little bit of information to start off, the International Association of Assessing Officers, as well as the Illinois Property Assessment Institute, define a small jurisdiction as a jurisdiction having 10,000 or less parcels. A medium jurisdiction, which is what Cunningham Township falls into, is between 10,001 and just one beneath 25,000. And what are some of the duties of the township assessor? Regardless of where the township assessor is, these responsibilities still are all the same. The difference in terms of how much responsibility an assessor has is really specific to how difficult the responsibilities are and how time-consuming they are to conduct these baseline duties. And some of these baseline duties specifically are applying the 3 approaches to value to ensure equitable assessment of all real property. For this job, that's obviously just only in Cunningham Township. We are overseeing and responsible for all parcel maintenance. We must measure all the properties, whether that's in person, like we always have to do, or utilizing aerial photography, and we have to maintain the characteristics as well as the sketches of the property and update those. And then we also have to calculate cost factors associated with property valuation. And those are just going to be the absolute baseline minimum duties that are required of a township assessor, but of course those aren't the only limiting duties that we have. So there are some more, such as developing, implementing, reviewing, analyzing automated valuation models, engaging with pending litigation, creating stratification tables for land sales, analyzing appraisal reports as it comes to appeal season, facilitating public engagement, whether that be FOIA requests or just simply anybody coming in asking, hey, what's going on with my taxes? Anything like that. And that too is not an exhaustive list, but just some of the duties that township assessors are responsible for. Given that our township is the size that it is, being what is classified as a medium jurisdiction township, I had to look mostly outside of central and southern Illinois in order to find comparables. And the measures of comparison that I was using, as you can see on the sheet that I passed out to you, they predominantly come from the most recent final abstracts that are distributed by the county each year, not distributed, that are created by the counties each year that these townships lie in. I'm sure that you all have seen the one just from our own township. I've just stratified the relevant data here, but if you all would like to see any of the final abstracts, I can definitely pass those over, or you're more than welcome to ask any of the either township supervisors, and I do mean supervisor, not assessor, either the township supervisors of these townships or the county assessors. Either of those people will generally have these final abstracts, and that is PTAX 260A form, just if you need the specific name. So taking a look at some of these comparables, like I said, unfortunately because of our size jurisdiction being a little abnormal for central and southern Illinois, with it being on the larger side, most townships in this portion of Illinois are either going to be part-time township assessors or they're going to be multi-township assessors, which is different from the position that I hold. While those baseline duties might still be the same, like I said, the time consumption for those particular responsibilities and the difficulty level of handling, let's say, for example, a township or multiple townships that only had 800 parcels total versus for Cunningham Township, we specifically have, as of 2023, 11,096. So big difference in terms of the time commitment, having to, take a look at each of those properties, readjust them as necessary depending on any updates that need to be made. So some of the comparables that I chose, I did a larger study than this, but these seem to be the comparables that were most applicable for one reason or another. And just to go down the line as to discuss why I believe that some of these comparables are, most appropriate. DeKalb Township, specifically because of its parcel count, has the most comparable parcel count out of all of the townships studied, and it's also a college town, similar to how Champaign-Urbana is. It doesn't have sister cities, but it has the University, Northern Illinois University, NIU. And there also is a similar residential and commercial EAV, although Cunningham Township is slightly higher in commercial and lower in residential. And then moving on to Sugar Grove, it is comparable, but there are less parcels than Cunningham Township, as you can see, by 1,000 or so. They have a slightly higher total EAV, which is equalized assessed value, than Cunningham Township. And they do have slightly more residential, they have a higher residential EAV, but Cunningham Township has far more commercial equalized assessed value, and we also have a very similar non-farm EAV growth rate from 2019 to 2023. And then the next two townships, Blackberry Township and Belvedere Township, I found to be the two most comparable out of all of the townships studied. Blackberry Township, for the reason being that even though they have a smaller parcel count than Cunningham Township, they have a very similar total EAV, although Cunningham Township is higher by almost a million. Blackberry has a higher residential EAV, but again, similar to Sugar Grove, Cunningham Township has a significantly higher commercial EAV. And yes, overall, less parcels and less equalized value to maintain and preside over than Cunningham Township, and they are still at a significantly higher salary than this position is. And then following that, Belvedere Township, I believe this is one of the two most comparable, as I just mentioned. Very similar parcel count, negligible difference. Very similar total EAV, with Cunningham's being higher overall. Slightly lower residential EAV, but significantly higher commercial. And we have a comparable non-farm growth rate once again, but a higher, EAV numeric value to them. And then Quincy Township, next one. Quincy Township, unfortunately, I tried several times to get the information from either the supervisor or the county assessor, but I was not able to get that prior to tonight's meeting. So the only thing that I have regarding this is that I am friends with the Quincy Township assessor, the current assessor, and they just set their most recent salary ordinance, and they just set it to start at 85 for the upcoming term of that. As you can see with Quincy Township, their salary ordinance had actually not been updated at all since 2012, and now coming to the number that they came to, as I said, for this upcoming term, it will be starting at 85,000 for them. And they are also comparable township as well, but unfortunately, like I said, I was not able to get that information to prove that in a timely manner. But of course, if I have that by the next meeting, I will be able to provide that to you all. And then lastly, I included Normal Township because, as we all know, it's one of the most comparables, at least in in proximity to Champaign-Urbana. As you can see by the numeric values, though, Normal Township does lead a bit higher on pretty much every category than Cunningham. And so while I did include it because it is still a relevant comparable, especially given that it is the closest in proximity, I don't believe that that is the strongest comparable on the list, but I still wanted to include it because I feel that that is important given that it's normal. And then why I chose the 3% in terms of the increase each year. It's an average for the cost of living adjustment. If you look across the last 4 years, the average, according to the Department of Revenue, is about 4.5%. And if you average it out over the last 8 years, it's about 3.3. So I figured that 3 was a good place to settle on in terms of the increase each year. I have more information, but I'm not quite sure what direction you all would like to head. So if you want to ask any questions or anything like that, I'm more than willing to answer.
We'll start with James. Do you have any questions, James?
No, I do not.
Okay. So Mary Alice?
So I remember we went through this exercise last time, and I know that we had comps at that time as well. Would it be possible to get those updated that was provided to us when we went through this before? I don't know if they overlap at all.
Some of them would overlap, but I should be able to get those to you, not right this second.
No,
is
not
not
right
what you're
this
asking.
second.
Okay, then
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
If you wouldn't mind though, just so I have the reminder, if you could follow up by sending me an email, I would appreciate that.
Happy
That
to.
would help me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I can provide that.
Any other questions? Grace?
Thanks for the information here. And a piece with some of the other elected officials hard because we don't know exactly who would be elected in there, but also the difference that there are certain qualifications for assessor, right? Unlike a lot of our other elected positions. And then I was wondering about the salary increases here, just noticing that it looked like the supervisor and the assessor over the past few years of what you've shown us here historically have been pretty much the same or the exact same the past quite a few years. So I just didn't know if there were thoughts on that kind of divergence, or if you just came up with these independent numbers, or if there was kind of a thought in relation to the supervisor and assessor as kind of combined elected leadership roles separately, but both part of the township.
Sure. Just for transparency, no, Danielle and I did not discuss this prior to developing our own numbers. So this information is solely just based off of what I have researched from other township officials, specifically from assessment officials within the state of Illinois. I found that this number was most appropriate for my job in comparison to the comparables that I provided. I am not as familiar with traditionally what supervisors are paid, although I do know that given the ordinances that I've seen, the assessor is almost always traditionally paid more than the supervisor. However, I didn't see that it was fit to pick a number after having seen Danielle's proposal. I didn't feel that it was fit to pick a number around hers or higher than hers because I just didn't feel that my data supported that. So that's why I chose what I chose.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Thanks, Ivana. We also have, as part of this proposal that you'll be voting on the 11th, the township clerk salary and the township board. Anyone speaking to that?
I would just like to note that the township clerk salary is the exact same as it is currently, and that was at my request, so it is no change from the current. But the town board one does appear to have gone up by $100 from $700 to $800 in the proposal.
Any other questions? Okay. Mary Alice?
So we're doing discussion, so I can have a comment, right? I would be personally fine if we kept the town board's amount at $700 to maintain it. I think $700 is enough that over 12 months you can afford what I was thinking that you would need to afford for this position, but I'm open to other ideas.
Grace?
I'm okay either way. I think keeping it the same, I would be okay with. This small increase and keeping it consistent, I think is also reasonable. I think it does when we're looking at the budget, also just times 7, that sometimes that can make more of a difference, especially when it's higher amounts of money. So I appreciate the clarification because I thought that was the same as before. So appreciate the clarification that it was 700. And I could go either way. I agree. I think that this one typically is, once a month and shorter meetings, and I think not as much of a time commitment. So I could be okay with this modest increase or keeping it the same.
Any other comments? Okay, so my question is, what's the best way to, this isn't going to be voted on tonight, what's the best way to keep this, roll this on to the next agenda?
You can send it to the next meeting, just like you do at committee of the whole when you keep something in committee. Just,
Okay, so we need a motion to send it to the next meeting with no recommendation.
it's probably the cleanest.
Someone willing to make that motion?
I would do it. I would move to the next Cunningham Town Board meeting, resolution number T 2024-10-006R, a resolution setting compensation of Cunningham Township officials for the 4-year term beginning May 19th, 2024, corrected to 2025. Yeah, I wasn't sure which one. I was going to say both. Is it
25.
okay? Yes. Cunningham Township Supervisor, Cunningham Township Clerk, and Cunningham Township Board, and beginning January 1, 2025, corrected to 2026, Cunningham Township Supervisor, Cunningham Township Assessor.
There's a second.
Second.
Moved by Grace, seconded by Jaya. Any further discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Miss Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Miss Hersey,
Yes.
Miss Colasetti,
Yes.
Miss Wilkin,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry, Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
That motion passes. That meeting will be the regular town board meeting on, let's see, November 11th is
Tuesday,
Veteran Day,
November
so it's actually
12th.
November 12th. Tuesday, November 12th. All right, and with no further business before the town board, this meeting is adjourned, and it'll be followed immediately by the regular city council meeting.